Good afternoon and welcome back to Slim Radio. Hope you're enjoying this very windy afternoon. So windy that you might even be able to hear the wind shaking the very studio. Hopefully not. But I was almost blown away as I was making my way here. But not as much as you're going to be blown away by today's songs and the episode as a whole. You are listening to Double Exposure, the eighth episode of the show where we take an album and a film and we connect them and we talk about them and we listen to the songs and we talk about the movie and the songs and we talk about all kinds of things you can't ever really know what we're gonna talk about. But that's the magic of Double Exposure with me, Antonín Tesař, your host. Now, what are we going to be looking at today? What are we going to be listening to? Well, let me start by telling you a little story that what happened to me in relation to this show because I was told by a listener. I actually don't even know if it was a listener or just a hater, but I was told that I am not niche enough, that we're not going deep enough with these deep cuts, and that it's actually all worthless. Okay, maybe they didn't say that actually. That's what I'm adding, but it felt like that. You know, when somebody calls you not niche enough, it hurts. Even though I have said before that it's not always about niche. Sometimes it's about love and Christmas, but it's not Christmas anymore, so that's not an excuse that I can use anymore. But I will stand my ground. Yes, I could pull out some avant-garde experimental 3-hour movie of paint drying, and I might at one point, but I'm not gonna do it just because somebody calls me not niche enough. So, as my mother always says, don't let the haters bring you down. And this aggression will not stand, man. And that's not what my mother says. That is actually a hint to what we're going to be talking about today, and that is the Big Lebowski. Okay. Yes, it is not niche, but it is a very good movie, which I recently rewatched. They were showing it at Lab 111 over the weekend. Got it on Friday with some friends who've never seen it before, and I had a blast. And it got me thinking that it could be good to talk about on this show because even though it is pretty famous, I feel like it's still not that kind of movie that everybody has seen, or that everybody knows. And even if they do, sometimes it gets brushed off as just a stoner comedy or that movie where nothing happens. And I think that it's actually very rich. Well, I'm not the only one who thinks that, in themes and motifs and characters and so on. And of course, it's also highly, highly quotable. If you just search up the Big Lebowski on YouTube, you will get like 7 searches, one after another, of this scene, the scene where they say this, the scene where this happens, because it's just the movie is like a highlight reel of funny moments that never end. So I will try to refrain from quoting them too much. I already did it once. But anyway, so that is the movie. But what are we pairing it up with? Well, that is the album A Child's Guide to Good and Evil by the West Coast Pop Art Experimental Band. Now, that is a lot of words. That is a lot of words. And also, we're going a bit nicher because this is a band from the late 60s, from the height of the psychedelic mania, where everybody was trying to be very cool and psychedelic. And actually, I didn't even know before looking into it at how much they actually tried, like Fawn, intentionally tried to just be very weird. Not all of them, but we're gonna get into that because this psychedelic. Oh, okay. Thank you very much. Oh. This psychedelic rock band only released about 3 albums in as under this name, or at least 3 that are available to this day on Spotify. There are some other projects that we're going to talk about, and they did not become a big hit. Most of the albums were commercially unsuccessful, but I think that there are some real highlights in those three albums. The album that we are listening to today is the third album, and the one that is um most the most accomplished and the most elaborate, the most advanced. It's regarded as that by critics and audiences alike. Also, when I was looking at the album, it keeps getting referred to as a combination of innocence and malice that keeps getting repeated everywhere in all articles. So you can be the judges of that if you can feel that from the songs. And actually, also, there is a very interesting history behind the band, behind their workings, the fights between the members, uh, takeover by somebody with a vision of profit, and so on. Much more than I ever thought just listening to the songs. But before I talk you to death, let's start with the first song on the album, 18 is Over the Hill.
Antique white lace, a plastic face, a tinfoil place, an empty space. You were so hung up on yourself and nothing else. I like too much the rain, the power of my brain, the sunshine and the open road ahead of me. Laughing because it's right to laugh. Dress up at night in the right dress. You can't change me into something that I'm not. I like too much the rain, the power of my brain, the sunshine and the open road ahead of me. I'll hear your line some other time when my men performance rhyme. The way you feel, it is so phony and unreal. I like too much the rain, the power of my brain, the sunshine and the open road ahead of me. I like too much the rain, the power of my brain, the sunshine and the open road ahead of me.
So that was the opening track from Child's Guide to Good and Evil from 1968 by the West Coast Pop Art Experiment Band. I don't think I can say this every time a song finishes, otherwise it's gonna take up half of the word count of this episode. But I really like the song. I think this was one of the first songs that I have heard from this album. It is very soft, kind of, and you can hear some of the influences of the backgrounds of the performers that were still around in the band when this was recorded, such as a folk background of the Harris brothers who made up half of the band. They had a folk background, so the finger picking came mostly from them. a very, very, very melancholic, also kind of very, very soft, but the typical, somewhat nonsensical lyrics that um, emerged at the time with, or not emerged, but that were typical for the psychedelic rock era. But that's only gonna get worse. But it does carry a certain emotion, and of course with the title track, or with the title of the track being 18 is over the hill, people have said, oh, is it about the draft, the age of we could get drafted, because of course this is 1968, the Vietnam War is in full swing. So the song being as sort of like a melancholic reflection of being about to turn 18 and suddenly becoming property of the state and being sent off to Vietnam to shoot people and get killed is very much kind of a common theme, obviously, in this era, kind of made explicit with the title there, potentially. But also this ties the song and the album to the Big Lebowski. But first, what is the Big Lebowski even about? What is it? Where did it come from? If you have never heard of this movie, but somehow it is a 1998 film by the Coen brothers, who have also made such films as No Country for Old Men, um, Fargo, Raising Arizona, Bart and Fink, Burn After Reading, and Oh Brother Where Art Thou? That's the name I couldn't remember. So some heavy hitters, some heavy hitters. Lately, they have split up with each brother going into a different direction. One making the the s- trilogy of movies such as Drive Away Dolls and Honey Don't. I think is the other one. Hope I'm not mistaking that with something else. And the other, Joel Cohen, making uh, films like Macbeth with Denzel Washington, black and white, very artsy. So you can kind of see how what each brother's input was on their collective or the movies that made together. The consensus right now is that alone neither of them has made anything as good as when they were making together. God knows if we're gonna see one of those again. But I digress, because Lebowski, even though when it released, it wasn't a big commercial success. Now it's considered by many to be one of their best films. But the problem when it released, or not the problem, but kind of the problem for the audiences, was that this was right after Fargo, which is a very different film from The Big Lebowski, and it's a lot bleaker. Even though, of course, the Coen brothers have a very specific style of comedy that is present in almost all of their movies, brighter or darker. But the audiences expected something more akin to Fargo and The Big Lebowski, a movie about a stoner, an unemployed stoner who gets into various situations around LA, was not, you know, was not what they expected. So it didn't make a lot of money. But as I said, the movie is about the dude Jeffrey Lebowski, known as the dude, who basically, with no fault of his own, becomes mistaken for another Jeffrey Lebowski, who is seemingly a millionaire, whose wife owns money all over town, and the people looking for the money go to the dude, the other Lebowski, instead, and urinate on his rug. And this desire to get the rug back sets in motion the whole rest of the film, which includes bowling, fake kidnapping, German nihilists, uh, a, a porn mogul who is kind of like a precursor to all the tech billionaires of today. Anyway, I mean, it's getting a bit tangled up right now, but that's also because the movie doesn't really follow a strict linear narrative. And definitely not from the initiative of the the characters themselves. So the dude, the main character, played by Jeffrey Bridges, now one of his most iconic roles, kind of gets hauled around by the people that he's interacting with, the side characters. He's just a pawn in this bigger plot of double crossings and gangsters and, father-daughter relationships. So it's kind of hard to say. It's kind of hard to summarize what the Big Lebowski is about, because it's, as many have said, not about much. The plot, the what happens is it's like a loose collection of various scenes, as what the Coen brothers had in their drawer, because they had been working on this film since 1991, which is also when the film taking place during the war in Iraq. And that is, now we're getting to the link to the album. I know I've been talking for a while, because we have this context of the war, and within that we have these very, very strong characters. One of the dude, who is an ex hippie, let's say, somebody who in the late 60s, was involved in those student movements. He says that he was one of the authors of the Port Huron Statement, not the second compromised version, he says, and he was a part of the Seattle Seven, big moments in the movements in the late 60s. But then when we see him in the film, he's unemployed. He's walking around in his robe in the supermarket, writing checks for less than $1 for milk. He doesn't really have money to pay rent, and he kind of looks, he seems like he doesn't really care much about anything at that point. And contrasted with that is Walter, played by Jeff Bridges, brilliantly. Again, this role was basically written for him, literally, because Jeff Bridges, a longtime collaborator of the Coen brothers, was the first and only choice for the role of Walter. Is a Vietnam War veteran, very aggressive, and represents this sort of war mentality that is that is very much a contrast to the dude's kind of laid back attitudes towards life. And of course, it is also is becomes more relevant since there's another war when this movie takes place, and we see Walter at the start basically repeating the lines that George Bush is saying on the television in the introduction of the film, about how the aggression will not stand. And drawing this back to the album, the 18 is over the hill is very likely to have meant something very different to these characters if we go back in their life, because these are a hippie and a soldier. So Walter was one of the ones who got drafted, likely once he turned 18, whereas the dude was the one listening to and potentially even writing songs like this, because he does say that he was involved in the music business at one point. But also with the dude's moral code of, not being happy with pretentious, compromised versions of things, he would probably not be happy with how things went behind the scenes for the band. But before we get into that, the next song on the album, the second track, In the Country.
San Francisco is dead. In LA, no one's on the street. Let's go off on our own in the country. All our friends will be there. No one will give us a hard time. We can make it alone in the country. Spock is locked away. Brown is down in jail again. Any minute the man will bust us. Our world upside down gives a medal for killing. Now I'm some kind of freak for wanting changes. San Francisco is dead. In LA, no one's on the street. Let's go off on our own in the country.
Another great song of the album called In the Country. We're listening to A Child's Guide to Good and Evil by the West Coast Pop Art Experimental Band from 1968. And we're talking about the film The Big Lebowski, which feels like kind of 20 years later of the character of the people who might have been listening to these songs. Because why did I say that, the dude, although he might have been into this whole counterculture movement, would not be happy with how things unfolded behind the scenes? Well, let's talk about the band itself. So, at the start, we had a trio. I already mentioned the Harris brothers. And that is Sean and Danny Harris's. Sean and Danny Harris. They were the sons of Roy Harris, one of America's most celebrated classical composers. Their mother was a Juilliard pianist, so you could say that music did run in their family. Although there is a negative side to this, of course, because you are influenced and you have the access to music and all this environment. But there are also potentially different expectations because when their father, classical composer, once again, heard their first album, which was in a similar style to this, but even maybe more experimental, even from the name of the band. He said to them, "It's like bringing you up for 17 years and realizing you're members of the Hitler Youth Movement." Now, those are some strong words, but I guess if you're a classical composer and suddenly your two sons are doing psychedelic rock, well, probably a big, the worlds apart, let's say, worlds apart. But then they were joined by Michael Lloyd, Beverly Hills local, who was not the son of musicians, but he did get piano lessons from a very early age. And they, at one point, they started making music together, started a band called The Laughing Wind. They were all happy, they had built a DIY studio. Pretty good. Pretty good. And then they were invited to a party at a mansion of Bob Markley. Now, Bob Markley is a very important figure in the West Coast Pop Art Experimental Band because he's basically the one who created it. But not in the sense of like being a musician and having a lot of ideas, but in the sense of I want to have a band, I want to be famous, I want to have money, and I want teenage girls to come to my concerts. Not the greatest motivations for starting a band. But Bob Markley, what he did was he said that he would pay for equipment, he would finance the whole thing if he can join the group as a non-musical member. I mean, for the three guys who had fun making music, but perhaps were not making a lot of money from it, well, that didn't sound like too bad of a deal, and so they agreed to it. And I mean, in a way, that is what made the West Coast pop art, like experimental band, a reality. I mean, question remains whether alone on their own they would have maybe made something greater independently, because Bob Marley did kind of take over everything. Everything was registered under his name. He was controlling what gets published, who gets paid, how much, and also who gets credited for what. So he got credited for most of the songs as being the writer, which no doubt he did write a lot of them. But apart from that, he was just playing the tambourine. And if some interviews are to be trusted, he was not very good at that either. So a very interesting figure, very influential, but at the same time, maybe for the wrong reasons in the context of a band. A little more background very quickly, because it is quite interesting, because he was the adopted son of an oil tycoon. Already quite interesting. And he went to law school. Then he tried to become a lawyer, an actor in LA. And then he released a single. But all these things he failed at, basically. He never practiced law. He failed as an actor, didn't make it. And then, apparently, according to, again, people people from that time, the single that he released was the worst thing that they had ever seen, basically. So you can understand his ambitions. You have all this, you have this money, you have the money, you have the ambition, but you just don't have the talent. You just find other talented people and then kind of convince them to do it with you. How sustainable and successful that was, we can talk about after the third track, Ritual number 1.
There she goes, being chased down the road to ruin her virginity in her hand. A very pretty bird broke her cocoon, about to cry underneath butterfly skies. Knocker with an old sweater passes by along the street.
So that was Ritual Number One, the third track from A Child's Guide to Good and Evil from 1968 by the West Coast Pop Art Experimental Band. And we heard a bit more of the experimental, and of course, the electric sitar was prominent as well. This was played by Ron Morgan, uh, lead guitarist that was brought on a bit later on in the stage in the history of the band, because I told you before about kind of the beginnings. You know, Bob Markley comes along. He's like, okay, I really want to do this band. I can't really do shit myself, so you can do the music, and I can write lyrics or whatever and play a little drum or something. But because of his control over everything, again, he was not paying his bandmates too much, and he was really forcing the whole experimental thing. Like that was what he wanted to be. He wanted to be very cool, especially he knew all these rich people. He knew the owner of Warner Brothers at that time, and he's met Andy Warhol, so he put pop art in the name, and he was doing shows for bands. So he wanted to be accepted, I guess, in that scene. So that's not to say that these guys, the Harris brothers and Lloyd, didn't want to do psychedelic rock, but probably some of the elements that we see on the more experimental tracks, none of which we have heard so far, are are there um because of Markley. And now you might say, oh, well, obviously that sounds really annoying. Well, that sounds like he just ruined everything, and we would have had a much nicer album if just the original three guys made it. Well, that is what I thought, but then I kept reading, and actually, a lot of the information about this band comes from The Legend of the West Coast Pop Art Experiment Band by Tim Forster. So thank you for putting in the work of making coherent history of the band, because it is, according to a lot of people, this clash between really like out there lyrics that Bob Markley really wanted to do, and like a 3 minute song of just silence, or well, that's on the extreme side, and all these other things, combined with the musical talents of the other band members that actually made the band unique and made these albums unique. So as I said, at this point in this album, we have a different guitarist, because um, Lloyd was so unhappy the with the with the direction of the band, and with Markley, that it eventually escalated to a physical fight over master tapes, and Lloyd broke a guitar over Markley's back and walked out. So they had to rely a bit more on this other guitarist that they had around, playing a bit less before. But that's Ron Morgan. That's the one playing the sitar on the track that we just heard. So to summarize, well, so we have this control freak guy who who's withholding money, but at the same time, and really forcing this experimental thing onto everybody else. But at the same time, this extreme pull to one direction that that he's creating ends up ends up creating a an interesting mixture when combined with the music and the desires of the rest of the band, who, to be fair, did not always know what they were even making when recording each track. An example of that is the next track, which ended up being titled "Our Drummer Always Plays in the Nude," on which one of the other members said that certainly wasn't true. Well, obviously, okay. It was just another of his contrived attempts to be hip. Well, listen for yourselves.
very comfortable girls who are straight, but not quite, who are ready for new adventures, ready for the altogether unexpected. I'm kind but not too gentle, I'm gentle but not too nice. When you find the right girl, she'll be rare and easily frightened. Use magic and secret potions, take her to some far off island. I'm kind but not too gentle, I'm gentle but not too nice. I like very comfortable girls who are straight, but not quite, who are ready for new adventures, ready for the altogether unexpected. I'm kind but not too gentle, I'm gentle but not too nice. I like very comfortable girls who are straight, but not quite, who are ready for new adventures, ready for the altogether unexpected. I'm kind but not too gentle, I'm gentle but not too nice.
And that was Our Drummer Always Plays in the Nude. And yes, lyrics like I like very comfortable girls who are straight but not quite is the kind of things that Bob Markley contributed to these songs. Now, let's go back to the world of The Big Lebowski because we already kind of established that it's a movie about not much, but it's also again like every other movie that I talk about here, as I always like to say, emotionally very rich and colorful. I mean, obviously, it's primarily a comedy, and it's really funny. I do think it's really funny, but you have to. I do think that you have to watch it a second time before it really starts being as funny as it truly is, because there's just such a speed of which with which the lines being said come at you. They and sometimes the comedy or the details are in the in the littlest things and littlest exchanges that you don't even comprehend when you're just trying to follow the plot. So only once you watch it again and you know that okay, well, the plot is not really the point. It is the moment, the present moment, that is always the core, the focus, which like real life, right? That's how it should be. Then you can truly only appreciate that. You can truly appreciate the film, in my opinion. I myself, personally, I was giggling and laughing in my theater seat, and it's also I think that this because it is this very specific type of comedy, and it is s- a one that is very, again, very typical to the Coen brothers, and but here it's really brought to the highest peaks, to the highest level, and you can also see it when in the screenplay itself, because a lot of the film, a lot of the dialogues are just stammering and like meaningless exchanges and arguing and you kind of imagine, okay, well, some of this has got to be improvised, right? when when you have the dude, the main character of the movie, saying four times in a line. Let me read you a line specifically to give an example. The royal we, the editorial, I dropped off the money exactly as per. Look, man, I've got certain information, all right? Certain things have come to light. And, has it ever occurred to you that instead of, running around blaming me, given the nature of all this new shit, this could be a lot more complex. I mean, it's just not just it might not be just such a simple and obviously I'm no Jeff Bridges, so that's this that doesn't really do the line justice. But my point is, this is all in the screenplay. Not like this is not Jeff Bridges having a line that makes sense and then just choosing to go I mean, in the middle of it. This is all written exactly on the page for the actors to follow, because the Coen brothers, well, they knew what they wanted. And I guess it must have been challenging, to learn this with all the pauses and everything. But then that gave all the actors more space, more room to focus on other things like mannerisms and gestures and facial expressions, which are also, very heightened. It's all kind of dreamlike, cartoonish. So it does work, but you have to really know what you want from the movie, or I mean, what you want from your actors. And on this note, all sort it kind of veers into like absurd comedy, absurd drama at points where it's just people repeating lines again and again, and it's also one of the qualities of the main character, the dude, who doesn't even seem to have opinions or stances of his own, and every scene he just repeats what he said in the previous scene, such as "this aggression will not stand, man," like that he heard Walter say, or later on some other things. I don't want this to be a quote fest, but this combined with the overarching genre, which is sort of a neo noir inspired by films like The Long Goodbye, for example, creates and also a third element, which is the city of Los Angeles itself, which plays a role of its own. Also, as in the album, we're on the West Coast, of course. This all meshed together. This Okay, we're in LA, and these are the kind of people that you might meet. Some ex hippies, but also war veterans, and also people bowling. Well, maybe it's not LA specific, but you get what I mean. And this placed in a neo noir and performance artists and all of these things, and it's hard to even describe what that creates, this sort of combination, but it is quite something, and in my opinion, very entertaining. But now let's move on with the album and play another beautiful song, in my opinion, and that is track number 5, As the World Rises and Falls.
Your eyes have grown tired of hunting for the fox and the owl, for smooth stones and a safe place to hide in the hills near your home. Now you walk with bare feet through the wet sand, and the boy sees you and comes running over and stands about 40 seashells away, wanting to walk on water to turn you on, but you don't pay any attention at all. As the world rises and falls, as the world rises and falls, as the world rises and falls. Now you have a woman's shape, thunderbolts in your fingertips. He has his eyes pinned on you. Be careful, he has whips and chains, and he plays ancient games of hurting anyone standing in his way. He can change the color of the sky if he wants to, but it's only magic used to him. 'Cause you don't be easily taken, or he won't remember you at all. As the world rises and falls, as the world rises and falls, as the world rises and I tried to tell you not to love him strongly as you did. He'll go out again someday, but you won't forget him for a long time. He tore the mask off your face and then put you down and made you want him more than anyone before, and then he walked away, and you don't hear from him at all.
And that was As the World Rises and Falls from the 1968 album by the West Coast pop art experimental band. Once again, very long band name. Apparently, also Bob Markley's idea to kind of describe the band. Well, pop art, well, that's what Andy Warhol was doing, so it's pretty cool. Experimental, well, to give them some room to be experimental. And the West Coast, well, they were on the West Coast. It's all pretty self-explanatory. But again, we had a bit of a more low-key song, not as experimental as some of the other ones. I think very nice. I think also the title or like and the chorus repeating lines of "As the world rises and falls" is kind of also does connect this era to the era of the late 60s and anti-Vietnam War sentiments to the present of the Big Lebowski. Oh, also potentially the present of today, but with that we're all getting ahead of ourselves. Yeah, well, that's going beyond the scope of this, maybe, but because it kind of suggests a cycle, right? As the world rises and falls. Well, there was a war. Wait 20 years. There's another war. Wait 20 years. It's these characters like the dude or Walter or any other of the brilliant, by the way, characters from the ensemble cast of the Big Lebowski that have to find their approach, their attitude, their philosophy to coping with these highs and lows, these rises and falls of life. And that kind of also unintentionally brings us to the final scene in the movie. We're not over yet. Don't turn it off yet. But because this is very relevant, because at the end, after everything, after all the hijinks, you could say, yeah, that's a word people don't use enough anymore. Finish and nothing is really resolved. The dude didn't really do much. There's nothing, but at last he's free of all this mess. He talks to the stranger, which is a cowboy character who's also the narrator of the film, in a bar in the bowling alley, and the stranger asks, "How's it going?" And the dude says, "Well, strikes and gutters," but the dude abides. Well, something along those lines. Saying, well, the world rises and falls, but you gotta face it. You just gotta. If you're falling right now, well, you know that you're gonna rise at some point again, and that might be a better approach than that of Walter, let's say, whose strategy is to approach everything with the utmost aggression, right? I think also what's funny, but also very interesting about this movie is you have these characters and they claim to have certain creeds, for example, and they claim to be someone or they claim to know something, but in so many of the cases, they're just either played wrong or pretending or lying to themselves. For example, we have the character of the millionaire, the Big Lebowski, the Jeffrey Lebowski, who we assume is a millionaire just because he lives in a mansion, but then we find out that he actually has no money of his own and he gets a stipend from his own daughter. And that brings us to the next track. Until the poorest of people have money to spend. Because Lebowski does tell the dude, the bums will always lose, and what happens with my money and how that affects you is none of my business. Get a job. Well, until the poorest people have money to spend.
Let's go away and not come back again till the forest are Let's go our way and not come back again till the poorest of people have money to spend.
And that was the sixth track from the album that we're listening to today, A Child's Guide to Good and Evil, from 1968 by the West Coast Pop Art Experimental Band. I said I wouldn't say it every time, but it just feels right, you know? And we talked about the hypocrisy of the Big Lebowski. And I think that also, I mean, of the character of the Big Lebowski, the seemingly wealthy man who's only just pretending to be so and actually tries to steal $1 million from a foundation that's supposed to help children with education. But he's a character in the Big Lebowski, the movie we're talking about today, and once again, the actions of this character create a contrast in which we can see what the dude is like, because he's, still with his laid back attitude and seeming unemployment. He doesn't care about money. He has he true is quite willing to accept the $10,000 or however much for delivering the ransom, but it's not like Walter. It's not like Walter who very intent on keeping the $1 million that they're carrying. He just wants to get his rock back, man. It really tied the whole room together. Okay. So with the quote anyway. And he just wants to be left alone, right? And the whole movie is just him not being left alone. He gets from place to place, oftentimes not even by himself. Sometimes he's driving and we see that, but more often than not he's just put into the back of a limousine and taken somewhere. There's even it's and of course the Coen brothers, they're aware of this. So in one scene he gets out of a limo and he gets dragged into another limo. Very funny. Uh but and it also contributes to, or like this is a part of a larger thing where you don't really know, like you can't really tell how much time passes between things or what time of day it is or what is going on. Like it can be morning, it can be night. They're playing bowling. Who knows what's happening there? He's drinking a cocktail and he walks out of the house, and it's like early morning, and it's all adds to the impression that it doesn't really matter. The the timeline, the succession of events. That's not the point here. The point is the situations, and the way that these people deal with those situations, and the question of whether any of it really matters at all in the end. But since we are running out of time quite fast, let's move on to the next track, and that is Watch Yourself.
to the West Coast pop art experimental band.
And that was Watch Yourself, this time overdubbed with some fake crowd noise that was not live. It was a studio trick, but the band did play quite a lot of live shows and light shows, because they played in a specific club, which was which was specialized in doing very elaborate light shows with a projector screen and so on, and of course all paid for and set up by Bob Markley once again. But we truly don't have too much time again. So let's move on to A Child's Guide to Good and Evil, and then let's tie it back to The Big Lebowski, because it does kind of feel like everybody in that movie has a very own has their very own guide to good and evil and to life in general. Once again.
Take my hand and run away with me through the forest until the leaves and trees slow us down. A vampire bat will suck blood from our hands. A dog with rabies will bite us. Rats will run up your legs, but nothing will matter. After the doors of many strange rooms have been bolted and locked, when you come back dragging your daydreams behind you, I'll give you a new shiny face and a yellow brick road. The rest of the world is wrong, and don't let anyone change you.
And that was A Child's Guide to Good and Evil, the title track from the album from 1916 by the West Coast Pop Art Experimental Band. And I think that this is quite a good encapsulation of how the band worked. You know, you have this elaborate riff, you have these nice harmonies, you have the sitar of Ron Morgan, and all the other musical elements of the rest of the band. And then you have Bob Markley come in with a weird ass monologue spoken word about, vampire bats sucking up blood and evil and war. But then again, you have to ask yourself, does that not kind of make the song this weird contrast? Well, that's I think it does work to a certain degree. Probably wasn't worth all the troubles with the guy himself, because as somebody said at the end, oh yeah, Lloyd said it was a good thing because it existed, but it was a bad thing because we had to deal with him. After after the band, after this album, two smaller projects were released. The last one was just titled Markley, a band, a group or a band. I think Markley, a group, kind of really, pointing to what was going on. But after the breakup, some of the members had happier fates than others. Michael Lloyd became a pretty successful producer, executive, did some soundtracks. Sean Harris also went on to have a music career. His brother Danny battled depression. Ron Morgan was a founding member of Three Dog Night. And Bob Markley himself, well, he kind of started falling and falling and falling. Dropped out of music, lived a bohemian lifestyle supposedly, and supposedly got arrested for being involved with underage girls as well, which is kind of on theme, but it's not, not confirmed, but makes makes sense, I suppose. Um, and ends up being basically all alone, neurologically damaged, supposedly. Again, because this is from the accounts of people that knew him and didn't like him very much. So, who's really to say? He inherited a lot of money, of course, from his oil tycoon father, but he didn't have anyone to call. So, in a way, the story of the band itself is a child's guide to good and evil, right? But what is your guide to good and evil? Are you like the dude taking it easy, being laid back, trying not to get involved? But well, then you still might end up getting beaten up, and your rug gets pissed on. Or you're gonna be like Walter, escalate, be aggressive, but it will only lead to more escalation than solving anything. Or be like Danny, no Danny, Donnie. Sorry, Donnie, the character whose main purpose in the film to be a stand for the audience and ask, "What are you talking about? What what was that?" and be told, "Shut up" by Walter. He's confused. He stays out of problems. He doesn't really. He's not even involved too much in anything, but he still falls victim to what goes around him, getting a heart attack and dying. And his two closest friends supposedly don't even have much to say about him in the eulogy. Well, it's not a very positive outlook, but the movie does end once again with, you know, it's strikes and gutters. It strikes and gutters. The world rises and falls, and you have to face it in one way or the other. It might not be effective enough, but you still have to try. And with that message for Thursday afternoon, I leave you, and we have one last short track titled S Kinda Summer. Listen to the whole album, listen to the whole band. You will find more experimental things, and you can judge for yourself whether Bob Markley was a good contributor or just a drag on the others. And do watch The Big Lebowski, but watch it twice, not just once. That's my request to ask of you. And then let me know what you thought. But now, as kind as summer, that's what should be definitely a part of your approach to life. Be kind and take care.
Be at the right road at the right time, and the dwarf with the pointed hat will lead you to a magic place. And a woman with a crystal ball will tell you many things about yourself and about girls.